for you exactly what the fuzz is all about with Google antitrust lawsuits. I've been asked this question by our SEO clients. I've been asked this question by our inkforall.com users. What is going on here? What does it mean? What are potential implications? And then I will give you some special insights into this, like the Alexander perspective. I think you'll find this very enlightening. So first of all, what are we talking about here? We are talking about a monopoly. And when we're talking about a monopoly, it's important to look at the definition. So we are talking about the exclusive possession or control. So in this case of Google, we're talking about the exclusive control of the supply in a service. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Does Google have exclusive possession or control of a certain service? Heck yes. It's got, look at the line. It's more than 92%. The best competitor has less than 3% market share. It's pathetic. Like, Google is absolutely crushing it. And what is Google's defense against the charge of being a monopoly? Well, you are. You're not forced to use Google. You can use others. So why is it Google's fault that everybody else apparently is not good? Why is it their fault? Why should they suffer? Well, let's break that down a little bit more. So just quickly, an antitrust is simply trying to break up that exclusive control or possession of a market, like completely cornering the market. Because what ends up happening, and like going back to the definition of monopoly, right? So a good example is like, if you think of it in a physical term, it's really easily understood. Like, let's say people get cold in the winter and they need warm jackets, and you have completely dominated the market of the trade and the supply of fur. And so we're not talking about modern times. We're talking about older times when like that was the way you would be warm in the winter, right? And so then, you know, if you exclusively control something, then you start acting like a monopoly and like using your monopoly, and basically nobody can break your monopoly. And that's kind of what we're talking about. It is typically something, antitrust is simply something you start hearing about when it's detrimental to the competition or detrimental to the consumer. And so, and by the way, I'm not going to go really into the politics of this or the actual case that they're bringing. I'm going to more talk about this from an SEO point of view, and whether Google wins this or loses this, kind of like what are the implications. So this is what we're talking about: monopoly, antitrust, and why Google is even like facing this accusation. It's because they're wildly successful. So it is important, though, to note that we're not just talking about just Google's success here. We're talking in the definition about the exclusive control of supply. So it's not a monopoly. Let's say when everybody can make a search engine, because everybody has access to the same supply, and therefore all competitors can compete at an equal level. Okay? We're talking about an exclusive control of supply. That's necessary. If Google is operating at an equal playing field and is better, then yeah, it's not abusing, it's not a monopoly. It's just really, really good. So that's the key difference. Now, you might say like, okay, supply, that doesn't apply to Google. Yes, it does. And so this is the key insight I'm trying to share with you guys. So what makes search engines work, what actually makes them good, is the extra information it has about your content and, in fact, about you. So I would argue that the supply here, the exclusive control of supply, that's what I'm going to argue in this presentation, is what makes Google a monopoly, as opposed to just a service that is really, really good. So I'm kind of dismantling Google's defense here in this presentation. And I would argue that Google is indeed a monopoly. Um, so you will love this slide. So the best search engines, controversial, the best search engine is actually the one that violates your privacy most. And I'm going to give you an example so you can understand this well. So you see a meme generator here, and you may have seen this meme in 1,000 different contexts. One time it says one thing, the other time it says something completely different. Every time it's maybe funny, right? Maybe some aren't. Now, the point is here that captioning a meme, that's what that gives the image context, right? That's how it's understood. And there's many ways to answer a question. When you search in Google, there's many ways to answer a question. But it's so important to understand, and SEOs understand this. Context is everything. So logging your online activity gives me an idea of what you're thinking. It allows me to complete your thought, that is your keyword, with the context of what I already know about you. Remove that spying, stop violating privacy, and the context is obliterated. And all we're left with is this meme picture without caption. And so the quality of search tremendously degrades if it has less access to data. So a good example is you search for pizza, right? And now I spy on your location. I know where you are. You're in Italy. So I'm going to show you where to go to the Tower of Pizza, how to go there. So maybe you're in the vicinity. That means something different. Now, you may say, well, like the Tower of Pizza is spelled with an S, Alexander. It's not spelled pizza. Well, you Google Tower of Pizza, like with 2 Z's, and see what comes up in Google image search. You'll see that Google understand that people actually don't know how to spell. So, but the point here is that, as an example, is that it can use maybe your mobile phone or GPS or maps data of your location to give context to your search. And based on your context, it can give you a more meaningful answer, right? So this is critical to understand, that the best search engine is the one that violates your privacy the most. So how search works. So you basically, the first stack there, you have thousands of pages that people have written about your search query. It contains the keywords, it's related to the topic, whatnot, right? Well, that is public domain. Everybody can analyze that. So that's shared data supply. Different people can crawl the web and find this. So that can result in a pretty good search engine. Maybe it's just okay. I would argue like Bing is in that category. Like Bing is not bad. It's not as good as Google, right? Evidently from the market share. So you can reduce actually thousands of pages on a topic to a few dozens of pages on a topic by doing a really good search engineering, okay? What makes the difference from an okay search engine to a scary good search engine, which is here, right here above me, the one that can return that magical, oh, Google gets it search engine experience, is the one that has access to an exclusive data supply. And that exclusive data supply is almost always, in the case of Google, it's almost always derived from its monopoly and its violation of your privacy. And that, of course, is set in a moral context, not in a legal context, okay? So the regulators and governments are setting regulatory frameworks for what is acceptable in terms of privacy and what is not. And consumers have the option to opt in and make choices about their how they share their information as well. So since everybody is clearly accepting Google's terms of service for all its products and services, you can't say this is illegal or violates your privacy because you're opting in and accepting. Now, what you're going to see is that this is where the government needs to come in and say, well, if you don't have a choice, if somebody says like, hand me over your grandpa's watch heirloom, right? In exchange for food and survival, well, you're going to give up that watch. It's not really a choice, you know? So if you see Google's market share and how good Google is compared to its competitors, do we really have a choice to not choose Google? No, we don't. So handing over your data to Google when it's so much better than everybody else, it's not really a choice. It's either choosing to violate your own privacy and accepting to do that, or basically not find the stuff online that you need. But we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail soon. So it's important to understand, and my case here is that the best search engine is the one that violates your privacy the most and spies on you the most. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about monopoly of supply of data. So here we're going to go into some evidence. Chrome, absolutely dominating the market. But Chrome is not some innocent browser project from the heart of Google. Chrome is essential to Google understanding your context, spying on you. I know that's a bad word, but that's essentially what it is. When you use the search bar historically was for typing in a URL you wanted to visit. Every character you type in that search bar goes through Google search. So when you're using Chrome, even if you don't intend it, you are, by default, it has the Google thing built in. Google is able to understand real user metrics around how sites are performing. Can understand how you're engaging on sites with sites outside of your google.com homepage experience. So it is not as simple as just not using google.com as a web page. And you can say, yes, sure, I can change my default search engine in Google Chrome, right? Yes, you could. But Google dominates and crushes the market with its browser, and it's the default setting. So Google has access to more of your private data than anybody else. That makes the Google search engine better. Chrome does, right? So this is the argument that Google has access to data that others don't have, right? So the next one is Android. 74% of the global market share. Now, when you're using Android, you're using a Google service. You're sharing data with Google, a lot of data. Google knows what you search, where you search. It knows so much about you through Android. That information allows Google to make a better search engine. It allows Google to tie this information to your profile to understand what the context is of your search. Personalized search, right? The next thing here, navigation apps. Google Maps and Waze, both owned by Google, crushing it, right? Apple Maps, to an extent. Apple Maps, not by virtue of the quality necessarily, probably by virtue of, at least not initially, it improved a lot, but definitely by virtue of being a default bundled app on the iPhone. So, but again, Google can make the best search engine for local information thanks to navigation app domination, absolute monopoly in this area of data, and it's contributing to google.com, the search engine. Also here, when we look at the most popular video streaming services, what do you watch? Not just what do you read? Well, YouTube has an unbelievable mobile reach. Now, this is definitely people watch a lot of Netflix, but it's different. People don't search Netflix for their life, for what they need for their life. People look at Netflix to be entertained. It's completely different. You could argue that Vimeo, sites like that are perhaps the only competitors. And if you look at the reach of YouTube, it is on mobile, it is more than 10 times bigger. Right? So again, Google's able to make the Google search engine better because it understands all your information about how you watch video and consume video and watch video and what elements of the video you skip and you keep watching and so forth. Sounds scary, huh? Because it is. Look at the next one, Google Analytics. Google Analytics, Universal Tags, Global Site Tag, Analytics Event Tracking, Analytics Linker, market shares. If you add, and there's some overlap here, but if you look at the market share, it is enormous, enormous. So, but the implication of Google Analytics is actually massive. Now think about, you are not using the Chrome browser. You are not using Android operating system. You're not using Google Maps, right? But you are visiting a web page, and the web page owner has installed Google Analytics on its site. You are still contributing your usage, how you use that page data, to Google through Analytics. And if that's not enough, even if there's not Analytics, Google still has its ads network with its JavaScript trackers and to know how to do contextual advertising. And it's all about cookies and trackers, and pixels, and knowing exactly, following you around the web. So even if you don't use Google services, you are still being followed and you're still being tracked. And that adds up to an alphabet of monopolies. An alphabet of monopolies in the sense of a monopoly where Google has cornered the entire market, the entire supply of special data. So how does search work? Well, there is public data, there's private data, and then there's data monopoly. So if you think about like other search engines like DuckDuckGo, they typically rely on public data, to some extent on private data that's anonymized. In the case of Google, they go a step further, and they also try to understand what the search context is by using Chrome, Android, analytics, cookies, and so forth to track you all over the web and your engagement even after you leave the google.com webpage. So it's not true that you can stop using Google search or Google services by just leaving google.com behind. It's not like you go to another website and Google is no longer involved. Okay, so what your user engagement is like on those pages and what the search context is from all those different services, and there's probably some that I even have missed. That adds up to a data monopoly, and I added this picture here from a book that says "Don't Be Evil." That basically is what we're talking about here. So we're talking about a good search engine versus a bad search engine. So the basic step here is that this exclusive data supply allows Google to become a scary good search engine, right? So the defense of Google to the antitrust monopoly is like, well, we're just better. That's why everybody uses us. No, you're better. You're better not because everybody chooses to use google.com as the page. You're better because you are having a monopoly on the supply of exclusive data that makes your search engine better than the rest, basically not allowing other search engines to compete on an equal level. They're lacking the data. So should Google break up? Should we break up Google, Alphabet, into different companies? So since we know that breaking up the data supply will actually just mean a worse search engine, I don't know that breaking up Google is actually going to be good for consumers. Now, this can be debated, and I would be inclined to say, well, something needs to happen. This is too much. It's not good, right? So I think this overall sentiment is like something like this should not happen. I just want to point out a reality here that without context, search engines are not as good. And if you break up the data supply, break up Google, then we need to be ready, depending on what this antitrust outcome is, we need to be ready for Bing quality search engine. Maybe slightly better, but that is the gist of it. If we break it up, we strip Google search engine of its extra context, the search engine experience that consumers have come to enjoy and get used to will actually diminish. Okay? So I would still think that something needs to happen, but just be aware that there's a consequence to breaking up the data. Now, the next thing you can think about is like, should then the data be opened? Well, one way to open up the supply is say, well, everybody has access to furs. Like Google, you should share your, so that they can make coats in the winter. So Google, you should share your data. It's okay for you to make a wonderful search engine, but now, why don't you share that information from analytics? Why don't you share that information, what you know about the user? Well, that would be good because then other search engines would be able to elevate their game and there would be more competition. Bing would get a lot better. DuckDuckGo would get a lot better in its search results. However, would it be a disaster for privacy? Imagine your private search data being out there in the hands of dozens of companies. I don't want that. I much rather have it just with one company that I can choose to trust or not trust, aka Google, that I have a relative expectation that Google is trying its best to keep my data safe and stored only within the context of Google. Right? So this base is based on trust. But if it's out there for more than a dozen companies, I don't want my data out there. So, yeah, tough. Now, here you can kind of see how there's an ad duopoly, they say, right? So you got Google and Facebook kind of cornering the whole online ad market, and this is like where we see a lot of impact. So because Google is so dominant in its search engine, it's actually very profitable to be a monopoly, and it's very profitable to corner the supply of something, right? So the only thing that Google does not own, right, is the whole social media thing. It tried it with Google Circles and stuff. It failed miserably. Facebook did really great in that. Is arguably a monopoly as well. We can talk about that another day, but getting Instagram, WhatsApp, and so forth. Google is definitely more of a monopoly than Facebook at this time, but at least from the data supply. But Facebook is trying to be everywhere too. We looked earlier at analytics trackers. That slide may be insightful when you're analyzing this, but here you can see Facebook analytics has a market share. Let's just look at analytics, Google Analytics versus Facebook Analytics. Let's just ignore these other ones for now, right? So then you can see that Facebook has a proportion of the analytics market. So why is Facebook number 2? Right? So this just underscores what I just said. They're number 2 in ad duopoly, because they have the tracking data, because they are spying on you. The way Facebook did that is, for example, with their add a comment thread where people can log in with Facebook, add it to your website, add a Facebook tracking pixel, to measure social engagement and interact with your Facebook and so forth and so on. So Facebook is trying, it's not at all as pervasive as monopolistic cornering that market as Google, but look what 7% of the analytics tracking means in terms of the advertising market. Amazon is starting to make a dent in that. It's challenging it. We'll in the next slide, we'll tell you why and how they are doing that. And it's very, very interesting. But overall, you can say that the financial consequence of the Google monopoly is that it owns almost, I would say more than a third, let's just say more than a third of the US digital advertising revenue. That is massive. Between Google and Facebook, you almost see the full picture. So now let's take a look at some threats to Google. So we already discussed that, in my opinion, Google is absolutely a monopoly because it has cornered the data supply. I've also established that breaking up or opening the data comes with severe drawbacks for consumers, so that those are not necessarily good solutions. And I also want to now show you some threats that Google is facing in the marketplace. So the first one, and here this is a good segue because we just showed that Amazon is challenging Google and Amazon, is that search is evolving. And it's important to understand that voice search is search as well. So when we talk about search engine optimization, that includes Alexa. Okay, so voice search is regular SEO, but with one search result, one answer, not 10 plus ads, right? They're going to find a way to monetize voice assistants with ads. That's for sure. We're not quite there yet. They're still really competing for market share. So this is not the right time to fill you up with ads. That would diminish the user experience, which means the other party would win. So ads come when you have, like a lot of ads come when you really have cornered the market more, or when multiple companies start feeling comfortable with their market share, and everybody gets in on the game of advertising and monetizing search in that way. So Google does not have a monopoly on voice search. So you can see here, Google Assistant, 500 million devices, Siri, 500 million devices, Cortana, 400 million devices, Amazon, Alexa, 100 million devices. But so voice search is a threat to Google, but here we see monopolistic behavior. So Google sees a threat to its future of search, right? An emerging threat, and that is good. That means there's healthy competition. But now something is happening. You know, more people are buying Alexas and Amazon devices. They're selling tremendous amount of devices. The reason people are buying those is single purpose. They want access to the voice search engine of Amazon, right? That's clearly an indicator. That's what consumers want. But now Google is bundling that with Android. So by bundling with Android, it has 500 million devices that have the Google Voice Assistant embedded, right? So that's number one. The second thing is, even though Alexa is amazing, and in many ways, when it's competing with Google on an equal playing field, it is surpassing Google in many areas, like understanding. I found that understanding children's voices, it's doing really well. Like I have both in my house, and so when a young kid speaks in broken English, they're doing a really good job at this voice thing. But when it comes to trying to ask for information or knowledge, Google is leveraging all of that data monopoly we talked about earlier to get a leg up. So Google is being monopolistic to win the voice search engine wars by leveraging that conglomerate of companies it has acquired that are all contributing data to understand how to be the best search engine. And on top of it, it is leveraging its Android empire to push more devices with that service and bundling it as well. So you cannot on Android switch to Alexa as your default search engine that will respond to your device. It's not a system setting. You'd have to hack it. Similar thing Apple is doing with its Siri. It's not like you can switch your default browser, that you can switch from Siri to the Google Assistant by default, or from on Android, same thing. If we were going to talk about evening the playing field here and encouraging innovation, at the very least, mobile operating systems need cross-platform portability, where you can choose your voice assistant. That is essential. And since that is not regulated right now, it's tolerated, these companies are really, it's unfair to Amazon what is happening here. Now, it doesn't stop there. You may notice that Microsoft also has this thing called Cortana. Now, Cortana is not as famous, but there are a lot of Windows computers out there. And Microsoft certainly has the engineers and has the Bing search engine to definitely make a great voice assistant if it really wanted to compete in that industry. Now, Google knows this, and you may not have thought of this before, but Pixel books are designed to reduce the use of Windows, to increase the use of Chrome, to even spy even more on you, because now your entire computer is a Google device, not just your browser, right? So really like devious if you think about it. Google Stadia. Well, where else could you use Cortana? Well, your Xbox. Well, can't have that, right? Let's try to compete and put out something of a gaming service that also integrates with Google. Like I told you earlier when I said I miss things, like things are coming to my mind now, like Google's TV, everything. Google wants to know all the data. And it's okay that these services exist, but they are all contributing this flow of information. It's like a huge river that becomes mighty because it has hundreds or thousands of little streams of data contributing to it. And so Amazon sold more devices for voice. Why? What gives? If you tell me that people are purpose buying so many Amazon devices for voice, why are they not like way ahead of Google? It's because Google is using its monopoly to gain a leg up. Okay, so another threat to Google is privacy regulation, and both regulation and technology is evolving. So I would argue that breaking up Google and breaking up the data, you can definitely do that. But there's another way to address the problem that is Google. And it's a more profound issue. Because at the end of the day, making the data accessible and leveraging the data like that, YouTube sells its data to Google and to Facebook and to Microsoft, and so that would actually be a worse thing for our privacy, right? It is actually better that Google does not share it and keep the data, right? But what needs to happen is comprehensive privacy data regulation, and it would be able to address all of Google's data acquisition methods. So as I've illustrated with the voice search, is that Google's dominance in search is not something you should take for granted. and I'm going to talk about one more threat in a little bit. But it is, in fact, a very competitive field despite its data monopoly. The problem is the data. And if that's the case, you don't necessarily have to win an antitrust case against Google. The government could just pass privacy regulation, and really with an eye on sharing that data. So if, for example, you did break up Google, and then you had privacy regulation on top of that they couldn't share, that YouTube and Google Maps could use this data for its own purpose to make its own service better, but not sell your data, that would probably hit the sweet spot. Just keep in mind that Google as a search engine would not be as good as you think it is now, because context is really everything. But overall speaking, I think we cannot live in a future where large companies have unlimited spying capabilities on everything in our lives and just have that data. That is too much. The price is too high. So something does need to happen, and it may require a little bit discomfort. But there are actually other threats to Google that are coming up, and new innovations and breakthroughs that will happen, I believe, by restricting some of the easy spying data supply. It will force Google to innovate. So AI is an existential threat to all search engines. And I'm going to introduce a term here called content denial of service. You may have not heard of before, a concept that that I think I've coined the term, but I don't know. I've not Googled it. I at least thought of this independently. That's all I can tell. And so you all know what a denial of service attack is. It's like when I'm going to send so many packets to your server right now, like to your web server, that your server won't handle it, and I will make your server go down. That's like a typical denial of service. There's different variations, but that's what people typically think of with a denial of service. Well, I'm arguing that AI developments like OpenAI's GPT-3, that is AI that can now write content, basically, is going to be flooding search engines with so much content that they're going to have a really hard time keeping up with it. Just like a web server that is flooded with IP packets has a really hard time keeping up with it. That will degrade the quality of search results. So if we had a hypothetical privacy regulation and antitrust breakup of sorts, then you would have this AI component that makes it difficult for all search engines, no matter who they are. And you kind of create a perfect storm where the utility of the search engine that you are used to today may be severely degraded. It would be the experience of a future where all these things collide would be similar to having these maglev high-speed trains that just take you to another city in no time. Degrade that to maybe I don't know, an unmaintained country road that is all the concrete's broken up, and you're going to have to replace your tires after a trip that takes you 10 times longer. Search in an overabundance of content about any topic, it becomes a very, very difficult problem to solve for Google and for any other company to really be able to continue to deliver good search results. And I already have met with and spoken to different individuals. Some of them are generating websites with tens of thousands of pieces of content a month, which I know as an expert in this industry I know is challenging the Google search algorithms. Now, Google is trying to combat this with innovation. And this is very important to understand when we're thinking about search and all that, and whether we should break up Google or not. I'm not going to decide on that. I'm just trying to put my thoughts out here. But understand that even with all that extra data, Google is not secured or not sure to keep its market share position in the future. It is in the best position to do so, but it's definitely not guaranteed to do so because of innovations and threats like I also said. I also mentioned that there is a privacy technical revolution in the previous slide, not just from regulation, but there are ad blockers and specialized browsers for people who care about their privacy and so forth and so on. So, but this, from all those threats, AI generated content, denial of service is the biggest threat to search engines, and they will have to evolve, invent entirely new algorithms, and basically fight AI with AI. One of the big AIs that Google has been pushing in response to this massive onslaught of new content. I mean, the compound growth rate, guys, of data produced is enormous. We are talking about exabytes of data magnitude and daily. And in the next 5 years, it's just unbelievable. And so one of the things that Google is already doing is they are trying to combat this with artificial intelligence as well. And so fighting AI with AI becomes the game of cat and mouse. Whose AI can keep up with whose AI? And already today, Google is applying something called Google BERT. And essentially, what it is classifying the informational value of your article to understand what it is about, what concepts are encoded in it, and it's representing that in a vector, a mathematical representation. All right. So if you want today, so this problem of a lot of content is only going to get worse by AI. But even today, it's already really bad. So the only way that you can keep quality search results up today is with Google analyzing content, figuring out informational content of what it is showing in the search results, matching it to users' expectations, right? And so if you want to be successful at content today, you have to use a service that, like inkforall.com, it's a free tool. That disclaimer, right? I am building that. You can look at the press page, find the white paper, and see how it all works. But it is the only tool of its kind that is fighting AI with the same type of AI, analyzing the top ranking articles and figuring out from a semantic viewpoint, meaning these kind of visuals, why they are ranking, why Google thought they are ranking well. Well, it's not the only thing. It's not the only thing. Once you're passing the Google BERT AI, there's also other algorithms and data sources that Google is using to refine it further. And that is what we talked about earlier, understanding your user engagement metrics, how long do you stay on the page, and so forth. But there is much more room for Google to fight AI with AI and innovate a lot. So we regulators and political people working on this should not assume that Google will be around in 5 years and still be good, unless Google continually every day reinvents itself and gets better to keep up with the times. And breaking up Google and robbing it of its privacy violating data monster may just be the thing that puts Google in a losing position against this this revolution of content generation, and something to keep in mind. So, should search be a public good? That's something that I'm going to kind of close with now. What is a public good? So, a public good is similar to the whole conversation of the healthcare debate in America. Like, should there be a public option? And so you could say, like, if everybody deserves to have internet access, and everybody needs a search engine to make the internet useful, kind of the gateway to the internet, then 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 shouldn't Google be a public good, right? And so there's an argument to be made for that, of course. Now, what is a public good? A public good is like a road, a public library. So they need to have two conditions. They need to be non-excludable, like everybody can use them, everybody has access to them, and non-subtractability. Like, it's not because you use the road that afterwards somebody else can't benefit from that road as well, or you diminish the value dramatically by using it for others. So in the case of a search engine, the development of a search engine is in many ways similar to maybe the project that created the interstate system of highways in the United States, right? If without the highways, you can't go, I can drive to Disney in Florida, or you can't go and do other business activities. So it becomes something you use for personal reasons as well as business reasons, and it lifts up society as a whole. Now, Google does not have to be a public good when it is an ethical company and provides this type of service, free of charge, so to speak, ad supported to the public. It is important to note, though, that, and it's something that needs to be considered in the entire debate around regulation, the value that Google is bringing to the economy, the value that Google is contributing to the economy, in some ways, is maybe more important than the interstate system. You still had local roads, by the way, before the interstate system, and you still had trains and other means of transport. But especially like in this age of Corona, like we're social distance, we work from home, we work from our computers, and we live in our city, maybe work in our city. We can still visit our office in our city. Maybe we don't drive to Disney. It's a loss. But I mean, I know it's nice to have the public roads, but I'm just saying that if we did not have Google, it would impact me personally in a bigger way than if I didn't have an interstate system. So breaking up Google and dramatically reducing the quality of such a quasi-private public good would dramatically impact the economy, unless it can be proven that somehow the breaking up or regulation would actually improve a long-term prospect for better outcomes. And that, of course, needs to be weighed very carefully, and arguments will have to be heard in that context. I also think about, like, if there was no Google, like, imagine a world where Google is not there, and we have the DuckDuckGos, we have the Bings, we have Yahoo, back maybe AOL search engine or something like it. Imagine a world where AI is writing so much content and it becomes so hard to find content, like a needle in a haystack, so hard to find what you're looking for. Maybe the free market will rise to the occasion, almost certainly, if there's a financial incentive. Maybe in the case of roads, it is something that is maybe a public-private partnership. Like the government relies on private contractors to help build the roads. Maybe the government relies on Silicon Valley engineers and pays them tax money or something to help build an amazing search engine as a public option. So I do think, though, that something that's run by the government will never be as good as something that is like built by the free market and is agile. Search and SEO, it changes so fast. This industry changes so fast. Um, it almost requires a monopoly to be able to keep up with. And that's perhaps the most scary thing of all. So, yeah, this is the last slide. This was a bit of a long meeting, but what do you think? Is this a good defense? It's okay for us to be a monopoly because you want this. So one way to look at it is say you choose Google, but that is not the right way to interpret the word you, because Google is monopolistic and you are only using Google because it is spying and so forth on through so many services and getting so much exclusive data. But what is the alternative? And would you accept a world where search engines are kind of bad, kind of broken, and where you cannot find information that you really wanted intuitively, where you spend a lot of time of your day trying to dig through information to find what you're looking for? Would that be a better world? Or would there be a split in the internet? Would that be better for you, where information is siloed in subnets and you would not see what's outside of your network, or you would not be able to find what is approved internet because the search engine is not able to cope with that much information? And only search engines that would be good enough would be the ones that are perhaps custom tailored to specific problems. Lots of things to think about, but ultimately how you answer this question, right, is going to matter a lot. And privacy regulators and antitrust individuals with government that are engaged in these procedures right now definitely need to look at how Google has used its monopoly. That would be for misused its monopoly in terms of anti-competitive behavior. But when we're just talking about SEO as a search engine, there's definitely large implications of what is being discussed. And I hope that with this video, which I'm now going to wrap up, you guys have a really good understanding of really what is at stake and what the complexities are and potential impacts on search. And I hope that if you like this video, you can give it a like or share or comment, and I will be happy to engage with you and have a nice conversation in the comment thread. Let me know what you're thinking. If you have alternate ideas, I would love to hear those as well. And hope you have a great day. Bye.